If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
Welcome to the Brothers in Crime podcast.
We are brothers.
We talk about true crime.
We don't take ourselves too seriously.
And you shouldn't either.
This episode is part 2 about Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. If you missed part 1, well, you need to start making some better life choices. Maybe more red meat, I don't know. For now, probably just go back and listen to part 1 and then part 2 will make sense.
So the murders happen June 12th, 94. The trial starts January 24th, 95, which in a case like this, that's actually pretty quickly. And the reason why it happened so quickly was that OJ was pressing his speedy trial rights. Like, they were ready to go. And to your point now, to talk about that, the reason they were ready to go was because he didn't just have a lawyer or a couple lawyers. He had, as Bob just said, literally the dream team. Like, if you Google dream team, you're going to find one of two things probably. Michael Jordan's best ever Olympic USA basketball team, which, there you go, dream team. Or you're going to find this cast of attorneys that represented OJ during his trial.
Each one of them famous in their own right.
Exactly.
You know, F. Lee Bailey, Johnny Cochran.
Yeah, okay. I was going to go through the list for you. But
go ahead.
You're jumping on my notes. So you already talked about Robert Shapiro, so he's on there. You got Johnny Cochran, which, again, like you said, right, he could have just hired Johnny Cochran, and he'd have this awesome defense attorney. Robert Kardashian was part of the team, F. Lee Bailey, Alan Dershowitz, the professor from Harvard Law School, Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld, who founded the Innocence Project, Gerald Ullman, Robert Blazer, Carl Douglas, and Sean Hawley. So he's got, 11 attorneys that represented him in this trial. Crazy. Any thoughts about any of these guys individually you want?
I mean, most of them I don't know, but I like just the heavyweights that he had in Shapiro and Bailey and Cochran. Like you said, any one of those would have been a formidable opponent and a force at the defense table. But the fact that he had all of them. Yeah.
I mean, it's wild. And they all were kind of like had their own giftings and not specialties, but like they were areas that they were, just better, more known for.
Oh, yeah, they were all very different in their style, and It's not like these were even all attorneys that were defending people accused of murder. That was their thing. I don't think that was Shapiro's thing at all. I think he's the first one that OJ went to and sort of, built the team after that.
Right, and he's kind of referred to as like the architect of the defense for kind of putting together this team and calling in these different players who each played a role and each had a part that really crafted, take away for the second what we're talking about, but just from a legal sort of observer standpoint, I mean, this is an incredible team of lawyers. It's pretty crazy.
That's the team. I mean, I would be very satisfied having that group represent me, for sure.
Right. I mean, I was thinking just to have one or two of those guys would be great, but to have all of them, and you got to, Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld, founded together the Innocence Project, and part of what they brought to the team was like the DNA technology and forensics. That was all still like really, really new. I mean, people, I'd say, especially in the legal community, really didn't understand a lot of that, but these guys made it a point to kind of get on that leading edge and not just say, oh, hey, we're going to kind of use DNA technology or we're going to use these forensics. They said, we want to understand it so that we can not only argue it, but that we can educate the jury, we can educate the judge, and so that they understand it for our client, which at that point in time, I mean, that was, now we expect that. It's sort of like, you have to do that as an attorney. You have to be able to do that. But I think at that point, they were kind of leading the charge in that direction.
F. Lee Bailey brought the old white guy, stance with him. Like, he'd been an attorney for, 50 years and looked the same the whole freaking time.
Right.
He always looked like a 60-year-old white-haired dude.
He had that street cred, too.
But Johnny brought the sauce.
Well, sure. I mean, yeah, for sure.
Not only was he a brilliant legal mind, God rest his soul, but, he gave the jury and America the catchphrase.
It's true. I mean, I'm going to let you say it. You could say it. You brought it up. You got to go there.
If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
That's right. which was kind of, I mean, that's risky. Like, I still, when you look at the prosecution, right, like having him, the whole glove thing, all that, I learned in law school that if you don't know for sure how a witness is going to answer a question, you probably shouldn't ask it. And this is one of those times where, like, what was the prosecutor's name?
Marcia Clark?
No, not that one, the other one.
Oh, the
Gosh,
dude.
yeah.
I can see him. Plain as day. I see his face.
I'll find it, but while we're thinking about
Bald
it.
head, glasses.
While we're thinking about it, Chris Darden, that was his name.
Yes.
So, he's kind of said in retrospect, like, yeah, they screwed up. And my understanding of the whole thing, the way that went down, was Marcia Clark did not want to do that, thought it was a terrible idea. And Darden was sort of like, we're doing it. And recognizes now that was a big misstep. That, like you said, it left with this, like, the quote of the trial. That's kind of...
Well, it did. And you have this image, the theatrics that Johnny pulled off. I remember Johnny Cochran standing there in the well. He's got this, this dark beanie cap on. He's in his suit, but he's got this beanie cap on, and he's looking like a burglar in the well. But he's so animated and so articulate that, man, he just pulled it off. And
yeah,
if you're brand new, what we're talking about is there was a bloody glove found behind Cato Kalin's.
A leather glove, to be clear. So it's not like a latex glove. So it's like a driving glove, or those kind of like you wear them, keep your hands warm.
Exactly. It's bloody. It's found behind Cato's little cabana where the thuds was heard from. And during the trial, they had OJ trial in the glove. He could not get it on his hand. His hand was way too big for it. And so there's what Johnny's saying. Like, he couldn't have done this. This bloody glove ain't him.
Right.
Because he can't fit his big old sausage fingers in it.
And it's important to note, though, that when he put the glove on, he had... because it's evidence, right? They had him put on some kind of, I don't know if they were latex or if they were like those plasticky, he had on gloves on his hands.
Yeah, or the fake socks they have at the shoe store sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. It was like that. So he had something like that on there. And then, I mean, if I'm his lawyer, I'm telling him before we go in, man, like drink and eat all the saltwatery stuff you can. Exercise your hand, like make your hand as fat as you can make it, as puffed up as you can, to try to make this thing not fit.
Right. And when you go to put it on, you need to fight.
And that's exactly what he did, right? He's trying to put it on. And I mean, it looks like, if you're a grown up trying to put on a kid's glove, that's what it looked like.
I was just saying, that's exactly what I was just thinking. Trying to put on a kid's glove when they don't want to cooperate.
Yeah. And so, I mean, just sold it perfectly. Absolutely sold it. And so I said this trial started January 24th, 1995. It would go on until October 3rd, 1995. This trial went on for forever.
Yeah, I don't remember what the soap operas did during that time.
They were off, that's for sure.
Yeah, I remember listening to this mostly on the radio at work.
You listened to it on the radio?
And I remember when
you're old.
When the verdict was in. Well, I mean, we barely had anything that even kind of resembled the beginnings of internet at that point. I mean, we were on this is before Windows 95, man.
Wow.
So I remember having a little radio up on the file cabinet, and I do remember one coworker coming in saying, hey, verdict's coming in, sort of cranking it up, and then of course the clerk mispronouncing his name a little bit, not mispronouncing, but stuttering on it.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up. So it's estimated that like 100 million people tuned into the verdict. That basically, like, everything just stopped. And I remember, I don't remember exactly where I was, but I feel like I was at home. I don't know. But I remember being somewhere where that was, everybody was just, okay, we got to, like, it's on. They're going to announce
shut
the
hell up.
Yeah, right. And so just to recap, I know I gave the dates, the January to October, but the judge presided over this case for 134 days. 134 days. And for a trial of this magnitude, a lot goes into that. Back in October of 94, the judge... Judge Ito, I was going to let you say that there. He had started interviewing 304 prospective jurors. And each of these jurors had to fill out a 75-page questionnaire.
Oh, good grief.
Could you imagine? 75-page questionnaire. Now, you might be wondering what kind of questions are on a 75-page questionnaire. Well, lucky for you, I have some of the questions. So, Bob.
That's easy for me. I'd be answering every one of those in a way that would not get me selected.
But, well, some of these, like, how do you even know what that is? Because here's some of your questions. Okay, are you ready? While in school, what was your favorite subject?
Hooky?
But again, I don't really understand what that question has to do with anything.
Right. How does that determine whether you're going to be a good juror, either from the state or the defense?
Well, and really, it's not even good. I think in these questionnaires, usually you're trying to figure out, if you're doing a pre-whatever questionnaire, you're really looking for suitability more than anything. Yeah, they're going to slip in some ones to try to figure out if you're the kind of person they want to strike. But generally speaking, I would think, although it doesn't seem like that's the case here, the court would be more concerned and focused on, is this person suitable for jury service? In other words, is there something that would make you not suitable? For example, here's a good question. Are you a fan of the USC Trojans football team? That's a good question, because guess what? If you're the biggest Trojans fan there ever was, the fact that OJ played for them, that might not affect you, but it's probably going to have some bearing on, and then the court can follow up with, okay, well, is the fact that you're a USC Trojans football team fan, is that going to make you give more or less weight to one side or the other? Are you going to favor somebody in this case based on that? That's at least relevant. But, then there are questions like, hold on, there's another one. Please name the 3 public figures you admire most.
What in the hell does that got to do with anything?
Beats me, but I know you would like the last question that I found, which is, would you like to be a juror in this case?
There's no right way to answer that.
And that, again, that's why even ask it?
I mean, my answer is probably just going to be a flat out honest, absolutely not.
Yeah, pass.
But of the people that say yes, I guess I understand what they're trying to do there. They're trying to, weed out the nuts, or people that want to be somehow associated with it for some kind of fame or something. But that fame ain't worth it.
Yeah, like here's another weird one, though. Spouse partner's place of birth. Where was your spouse born?
What the...
Yeah, I don't know. Now, here's a good one for people in California. Have you ever had any personal interaction with a celebrity, such as writing a celebrity a letter, receiving a letter or photograph from a celebrity, or getting an autograph from a celebrity?
So, I mean, do you have to answer those questions? Because I'd be like, it's none of your damn business.
Well,
government.
I mean, you could do that, but judge might have some questions for you. Might have some follow-up. Yeah, I mean, this is before the Simpson case. Did you read any book, articles, or magazines concerning DNA analysis?
Fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. Some really, really interesting questions here. Some that seem to make sense and some that just kind of mind-boggling to me.
All right, so enough with these ridiculous questions. The trial was quite the show.
Mm-hmm.
And in addition to the theatrics that were brilliant, by the way, with the glove and whatnot, there was an issue. One of the lead investigators, or the lead investigator, Mark Fuhrman, he became a centerpiece of the whole thing. I think there was already a little bit of a racial division there on the way people saw things.
Mm-hmm.
I think in large, I'm not going to say everybody, but in large part, folks that were black tended to think that OJ was innocent. And in large part, white folks seemed to think he was guilty. Again, not everybody. But then somebody dug up and found some evidence about old Mark Fuhrman, that lead investigator, and using the N-word in his past, and some witnesses to that effect. And I think that, raised some eyebrows, as it should. So there were also, the defense was planting the seed that any evidence that was found was literally planted by the racist detective.
Yeah, and just to I want to put a point on this Fuhrman thing, because it's a really big deal. So he's this main investigator in the case, and he's like, you think about it this way, right? He's the state's like star police officer expert in a way. So they're calling him up, and he's kind of like the guy that they're like, yeah, tell us what you did, Detective Fuhrman. Oh, they're trying to paint him out to be this like, heroic savior cop, because that's just what you do. And then F. Lee Bailey is the one who does the cross-examination, which you got to remember, this guy is like, I mean, F. Lee Bailey, you hear his name, you probably think, even if I don't know who that is, I've heard of it because he's represented, I mean, Boston Strangler, he represented Sam Shepard. Like, this guy has, like, there's no case that's too big for him. And so he gets up there and he just does this absolute bullying cross-examination of Fuhrman. I mean, he just goes after the man's throat. And he says, you know, in the past 10 years, have you ever used the N-word? And, of course, you know, Fuhrman's like, absolutely not. I've never done that. Well, what Fuhrman didn't know was that they had these tapes where he had been recorded using that. Well, guess what? Once you play those tapes for the jury, which, you know, I don't think we talked about that yet, but the makeup of the jury was predominantly African Americans or black folks. There were 9, I think. Yeah, there were 9 jurors who were black on that jury. And I mean, whether you're black or white, this should be reprehensible and should absolutely piss you off and make you completely go, all right, well, you just sat there and lied about using this word. Why should I believe anything you said?
Right.
Even if it doesn't piss you off, but it should piss you off.
Apparently you're a racist because you have used this word and been recorded using it, and you lied on the stand, so is it such a stretch to think you might have planted evidence?
Bingo.
Now that I know you're a liar and you've got it in for somebody because of their skin color? Yeah.
Yeah, I cannot imagine being the prosecutor, because you know the prosecutors, I'm sure they weren't aware of this, or they probably wouldn't have even called him. They would have figured out a way to get around bringing him into the case, or if they would have called him, they would have kept it.
Oh, that had to be a bad day to
right?
be Marsha Clark or Chris Darden.
I mean, that had to be like, yeah, that I don't feel bad for Fuhrman at all. Like, not even a little bit. But for the prosecutors, I mean, that is like, whew, that's a tough day.
Yeah, are you effing kidding me?
Like, yeah, because like you said, it really is. It's a double whammy because now you have this, this guy's looks at me, he's a racist, and then you've got on top of that, he just lied to the jury.
Right.
All of his credibility is basically shot at that point, and he's the guy that you've basically tied your case to.
And the defense just rode that pony on home. I don't blame him one bit. I would have done the same thing.
Yeah.
Here's the guy that's carrying this case, and
Bob's going through puberty, guys. Bear with him.
And here's what you get out of him. Do you trust it?
Yeah. I'm thinking about like how that's just wild. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that doesn't happen at trials typically. I mean, it happens occasionally, but that is not a typical thing that the prosecution's so unaware of some evidence, or either side really is so unaware of some evidence that is so damaging to a major witness that it just rocks the whole case.
That happens on TV.
Right.
But really not, I've watched a lot of live real trials, and you don't.
Yeah, generally they're honestly pretty boring.
Yes.
Because you've worked out all that stuff, and then it's like, okay, for example, if the prosecution knew that Mark Fuhrman had done that he had used that word on tapes or whatever, one, they would have had to disclose that to the defense, and
right.
Two, they would have done everything they could to not need to call him to the trial so that they didn't have to put him on the stand, and three, if they did, what they would have done most likely would have been to try to inoculate his testimony by saying,
hit that head on right up at the front.
Yeah, Mr. Fuhrman or Detective Fuhrman or whatever. Now, in the past, have you done this and given him a chance to own it? And then I don't know how you explain it, but I guess put his thoughts behind why he talked that way.
Yeah, try and come up with something. I'm with you. Keep him off the stand. But yeah. I think it worked out the way it's supposed to, because if you do, I mean, if you've got a cop that looks that way or thinks that way about an entire race of people, and then will sit on the stand and lie about it, I just think that's worthy of being exposed.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's I like I said, I have no love lost for Fuhrman. Like, I'm glad that happened the way it did, because that's
And if everybody knew about it, and I was the defense, I'd be calling him for my case.
Right.
Because I'm going to get that out in the jury's ears, and then in the rest of my case, I'm going to keep referring back. I don't care what he says. I don't care if he says he watched OJ do it.
Right.
I don't care, because anything he says, I'm just going to keep pointing back to. He used the word, we recorded it, he sat up here and lied to you.
Exactly. Now, talking about the jury, because we talked to, I don't want to just focus in. We're not honing in on the racial makeup, but also just the total composition. So there were 10 women and 2 men who made up the jury. that ultimately decided the case. And then there were, just breaking it out by education, there were 2 jurors who had graduated from college, 9 high school graduates, and 1 who had not graduated high school. So really, I mean, yeah, there's a bit more women than men. There's a bit more from the African American community. But I think given where the trial was and the way that all went down, this seems like a fairly representative jury of that area. And,
Yeah,
so.
and I think it's silly sometimes the way we think that, well, a jury of this makeup is more likely to convict this defendant or is more likely to acquit. I don't really know about that, because you hear just as many situations where the big news is, oh, can you believe that an all-female jury acquitted this person?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's a whole lot. I mean, we just love to categorize people by sex and race and things, and
Stereotypes.
it's just more amusement than for most people. I don't really get it. And like I say, I was on the I don't know going in whether he did it or not. What sort of turned me, I think, the most is really after the trial. And I didn't feel like, I didn't know one way or the other whether the jury got it right or wrong afterward. I tended to be more on the, based on what they had and what they knew, I sort of felt like they, did what reasonable people would do. But what sunk it for me was after the trial, his mission to go find the real killers. And apparently he thought they were on a golf course somewhere, because that's how he spent, the next few years of his life, until he decided to go get himself, in trouble for kidnapping and robbery in Vegas some years later.
That's funny. So I don't want to stick on this jury thing too much, but there's just one last little piece, and then we can kind of jump into the other stuff you want to talk about. But so the final jury who decided his case, because I should have pointed out too, in this case, because of just the nature of it and how long it lasted, the court seated 12 jurors and 12 alternates. And then in the end, I think they lost 10 jurors along the way. So anyway, so you end up with this final jury, and out of those who became the final jury, which I had referenced earlier, just some interesting facts based on those questionnaires and things that they had answered. None of them regularly read a newspaper, but 8 of them out of 12 regularly watched tabloid TV shows. 5 thought it was sometimes appropriate to use force on another family member, and all of them were Democrats. 5 reported that they or another family member had had a negative experience with the police, and 9 thought that O.J. was less likely to be a murderer because he was a professional athlete, which I would think nowadays that might be a little bit more. I think people might be less likely to feel that way than they did back in the 90s.
Probably that 30 years ago.
Right. Yeah, being a pro athlete was like kind of a real profession, where now it's a profession.
Right.
But
And I can see the logic there. You're thinking that crime is less likely in folks that are socioeconomically stable and have a career and support systems and all that.
Sure.
But all the cases we've done and all the whack jobs of varying degrees of wealth and success that have done horrible things, I'd be a big fat, no, he's not less likely. I don't care who he is. I think the Pope might be sketchy. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right, so that's a good bit about the jury and the trial. I like that you got on the kind of the aftermath, right? So the aftermath, we got him. He's on the golf course. He also wrote the book If I Did It.
Right.
And but I think it would also be important, in addition to the criminal trial, there was another trial in this case.
Oh yes, the civil trial brought by the Goldmans, which O.J. lost to the tune of $33.5 million, something like that.
It was a ton. I feel like I thought it was more than that, but you're probably right. It was a lot.
That was a wrongful death lawsuit where the burden of proof is lower than in a criminal case.
Correct.
What is that one?
I want to say preponderance of the evidence, but I'm not positive. So you asked me that too fast.
Yeah, so that preponderance of the evidence deal, which that just means it's more likely that they did it than that they didn't, right?
Yeah, basically. I mean, if you think about it, is something more likely than not to have happened. So the standard is much lower. Beyond a reasonable doubt, which is, like you said, the standard in criminal cases, is the highest That is the highest burden.
That's saying, like, okay, barring the fact that aliens came down and did this, the state has proven that this happened.
Yeah, you're allowed to have a doubt, but it has to be like an unreasonable doubt, like you just said. So
Like aliens.
Or some crazy theory that nobody could have anticipated, or that you could come up with, but that doesn't really make any sense.
Right. Somebody else could have teleported in there and done this. Things that are just not reasonable for normal people to believe. There's also, from the jury's perspective, in a criminal case, you're looking at taking away this person's freedom or their life, whereas in a civil case, you're talking about money. And millions of dollars is a lot of money, but I would imagine you'd be less apprehensive to find someone responsible when you know it's going to cost their pocketbook than thinking it would end their life or take away their freedom. I would hope a jury would take that more seriously.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's a really good point. And in this case, so like you said, a civil jury found that it was more likely than not that O.J. had killed his ex-wife, Nicole, and Ron Goldman, and awarded millions of dollars to their families, millions of dollars that were never really paid because, again, O.J. has good lawyers and counsel and all this crap and laws and whatever. And my understanding is he moved to Florida because one of the benefits of living in Florida for somebody like him was that his certain assets are not subject to judgments there from essentially like out-of-state judgments. So this judgment would have been entered in California against him for whatever, $30 million. He moves to Florida, and like his house, and there are different categories of assets that they can't come after because of this Florida law. So he goes there and he buys a $5 million house. Well, he's just parked $5 million of his money into an asset that they can't come after based on the laws in Florida.
Right, and he can spend all his time in Vegas that he wants.
Well, why do you bring that up, Bob?
Well, because that's where he got arrested for robbery and kidnapping for trying to steal something he thought was his or whatever.
Yeah, it's my understanding that he was... his story, right, that he was attempting to retrieve sports memorabilia that he'd previously auctioned. Because remember, he had the Dream Team, and the Dream Team didn't do it for free or for publicity. I don't even know. I'm sure the amount's out there somewhere, but I can't imagine what he spent on his defense in his criminal trial. But so his funds were pretty well depleted. Then he gets hit with this judgment. So by the time we get to, I think it was like 2007, when he gets arrested for that robbery and kidnapping, he's probably looking to make some change.
Might be, but you just want to, like, what were you thinking, dude? You managed to somehow barely escape being convicted for killing two people. You got by, barely, and now you're going to go involve yourself in this stupid shit? After this trial concluded, it was kind of a 50-50 split between people who thought he was guilty and got away with murder, and people who thought he was innocent and framed by the police and everything was cool. So my point to that is that there were certainly still a lot of people left around that felt like he got away with the murder, so he should be in prison, and if this deal is the way to get him there, that's fine. I'm not saying that's right. I don't think you should convict somebody for the wrong crime for the right reason or whatever, however that works.
Yeah, and I think, it's important because you brought it up a couple times just about how, different folks kind of viewed the outcome differently. And this has been described. This isn't like, Bob and Will's take. I mean, this has been described. I think it was like the case that displayed the racial gap in America. I think that's the phrase that's been used in a historical context in terms of, people who are much smarter than I am who've written about this stuff. That it really did it didn't create it, it just put it on display. And I think when you break down or you think about who felt which way and why as they were watching this unfold, a lot of that was informed by people's experiences in life. So if your experience in life was that the police are good and when I call them, they come and they help me, then, you might look at this case one way. And if if instead your experiences were the police treat me like crap, or generally, I'm not treated as well, or I've had these issues, or I've had this run-in, or I've seen somebody that I love or know and care about be profiled or treated a certain way, then you viewed this case very differently, especially once that evidence got put on about, Fuhrman and what he said, and then the way that the defense did a very good job, and I'm not saying whether there was or wasn't, but the way the defense painted a very clear picture that there was at least a reason to think that maybe some of that police work had been questionable, or that things had been planted or moved. And having reviewed it, I don't really believe that happened in this case. But I think the defense did a great job in the trial of opening that door and raising that question and
creating a reasonable doubt.
Yeah, of really making it so that you had to really wonder and think like, well, maybe that could have happened.
Even if you didn't believe, it was definitely evidence was planted, it wouldn't be unreasonable to think it could have.
Right.
And also remember, this is just a couple of years after Rodney King incident in L.A.
Exactly. That's where I wanted to go with this is we can't just look at this case in a vacuum. I mean, you got to look at it in the context of what was going on when this was happening.
And we had videotape of Rodney King.
Right.
They beat the hell out of him.
Yeah.
On the video. So to hear that cops did some bad stuff, not far-fetched. We've seen video of it.
Well, and again, like you says, LA, we're talking LAPD. The LAPD's reputation at that point with this kind of stuff, it like you said, there wouldn't be unreasonable to think, well, sure, maybe they did do this. Maybe they are trying to go after OJ because, he happens to have proximity to her, and he's black, and it is not crazy to think in this context, in this time frame, with everything else that had been going on, that was a thing. And his defense team did an excellent job of just teeing that up with as much evidence and as much framing and questioning to really put that in front of the jury as they could.
I'm never a fan of playing the race card, but when it's a legitimate element of the circumstances, or could be, I think it's right to be brought to light. Now, where are we skipping to next?
That's a good question. So we've kind of covered a lot of that stuff.
How about he died and the Goldman still ain't getting a dime?
Yeah. Well, I think, was it you that told me about whenever he had his friends and family come visit him in his last days, how that went down in terms of what they had to do to visit him?
No.
You told me this.
I don't think it was me.
You told me about how they had to sign non-disclosure agreements.
Oh, I did. Where did that come from?
Because you told me that, I'd probably do that for you.
Yeah, I do recall that. I can't remember where that was reported, but I do remember.
You're getting old. You can't even remember stuff we talked about a week ago.
Yeah, I do remember that. And there have been a number of people who have made deathbed confessions in history, throughout history. So, yeah, I could totally see you doing something like that.
I mean, yeah, I got to protect you even after you're gone. The jury sat with this case for 8 months. There was tons of testimony, tons of evidence. There was technical stuff. There was crazy flashpoints like the Fuhrman cross-examination. There was a lot. And I think what might have bothered some of the folks who felt like OJ got away with murder was that it took the jury less than 4 hours to acquit him of those charges. But at the end of the day, the jury had basically lived with this case for that long. So who knows? But, one of the prosecutors in the case, Marcia Clark, her take on it, she's said, quote, "It was painful. That was not justice. And I thought of Ron and Nicole, and I thought, this is wrong. It's so wrong. And regardless of whether you think OJ did it, or you think he didn't do it, or you think that the government proved it, or they didn't prove it, at the end of the day, the reality is what happened to Ron and Nicole was awful." And at least one court said that OJ was responsible, even if not criminally responsible, that he was civilly responsible for their murders. And that did bring a small, just tiny bit of solace to the families to know that at least some official formal entity had said, yes, he is the one who's responsible for their deaths. But in all this, it's easy to talk about what OJ did and OJ and his afterward and everything else. And, of course, this case has recently come back up because on April 10th, he died at the age of 76. And some have said that, OJ got to live the long and eventually, after he got out of prison for robbery, or as Bob alluded to, he spent a lot of time on the golf course in between there, but he got to kind of live out those long golden years that Ron and Nicole never got to live out. And so as we close this out, I just want to say that regardless of how you feel or what you think or what the evidence may or may not have shown, we don't want to let it get lost in here that Ron and Nicole are the ones that we should be thinking about, and their families, and the fact that the world was robbed of those two young people who seem to be just great, awesome, fun people that the world didn't deserve to lose.
And she was fine.
Hey, thanks for hanging out with us on the Brothers in Crime podcast. Feedback and suggestions are always welcome. For links and resources related to this episode, please see the show notes or visit us at brothersincrimepodcast.com. We hope you'll save, subscribe, or bookmark us on your favorite podcast site, and join us for the next episode.